History possesses a wry sense of humor, a dark, chaotic, and at times utterly ridiculous sense of humor. What you are about to witness are 33 genuine instances where humanity truly outdid itself. Not through brilliance, but through sheer absurdity. Armies brought to shame by birds, navies exchanged for sugary beverages, deceased individuals winning horse races. These aren't mere myths or fabrications. They are all 100% authentic evidence that the narrative of humanity is less a triumphant saga and more an ongoing comedic performance. Take, for instance, the year 1989, during which the Soviet Union resembled a vast garage sale, desperately seeking a taste of Western delights, particularly Pepsi. The main problem was that their currency, the ruble, was virtually worthless, an embarrassment really. Thus, in an extraordinary act of barter that could only occur when a superpower finds itself in dire straits, they traded away what they possessed, an entire fleet of the Navy. But before we continue, please remember to like, subscribe to the channel, and comment below about how you discovered us. Pepsi exchanged a sugary concoction and in return received a cruiser, a frigate, a destroyer, and 17 submarines. For a brief and comical moment, a soda company stood in possession of the 6th largest military fleet on Earth. The board meetings must have been utterly wild. Johnson, how are the profits for the third quarter? Up 4%, sir. Additionally, we've successfully blocked a shipment of coke in the Baltic. They promptly sold the entirety of the fleet to a Swedish scrapyard, officially securing their place in history with the most legendary coupon deal ever made. Moving on, let's shift our focus to military strategy as we travel to Australia in 1932. The nation found itself facing an alarming invasion. 20,000 emus were rampaging, ruining crops. Consequently, the Australian government enacted the most rational course of action they could conceive. They declared war on the birds. They dispatched the Royal Australian Artillery, armed with machine guns, to carry out what could only be described as a genocidal mission. Yet the emus, seemingly trained by Sun Tzu himself, utilized sophisticated guerrilla tactics. They broke into small, swift groups, making them nearly impossible to target. The soldiers appeared like cartoon characters, wildly firing into the bushes while the emus laughed, darting away unscathed. After a week filled with humiliation and the expenditure of thousands of bullets, the army ultimately retreated. They were bested by birds. Australia, a continent literally structured to destroy humans, was overpowered by its own oversized feathered velociraptors. Now, number 3. Do you believe that winning requires skill and well-being alive? Tell that to Frank Hayes. In 1923, this jockey was infamous for being a professional loser. Having never secured a victory in any race, he was given an unexpected chance to ride a horse named Sweet Kiss. However, midway through the race, his heart decided to quit. He suffered a massive heart attack, passing away instantly. Yet, in an extraordinary display of sheer persistence, his body remained perfectly balanced in the saddle. The horse, blissfully unaware of its rider's departure from the living world, galloped across the finish line first. Frank Hayes, against all odds, won the race posthumously. The track officials had to officially declare a deceased individual as the winner, which surely led to an interesting conversation. The horse became so spooked by this incident that it earned the nickname the Sweet Kiss of Death and never raced again. Honestly, would you dare to? Number 4. In 1962, Tanzania experienced a bizarre epidemic. Not the flu, not smallpox, but an epidemic of laughter. It all began with 3 schoolgirls giggling uncontrollably and simply couldn't stop. This wasn't joyful mirth. It manifested as painful, exhausting, uncontrollable fits of laughter. The laughter spread through their school, affecting 95 students and forcing the institution to close its doors. However, the laughter epidemic became a traveling show. The children returned home and shared it with their villages. In total, over 1,000 people were impacted for 18 grueling months. Envision the horror. You can't work, cannot sleep, and your mind is trapped in an endless loop of agonizing laughter akin to a plot straight from a Joker tale. But instead of chaos reigning in Gotham, it led to delightfully awkward family dinners across Africa. Next, we have swindlers, and then there's Victor Lustig, the undisputed heavyweight champion of audacity. In 1925, he boldly decided to sell the Eiffel Tower. Disguising himself as a government official, he gathered Paris's leading scrap metal dealers for a clandestine meeting at a hotel, spun an elaborate tale about the tower's maintenance costs being exorbitant, and persuaded them that it was being sold for scrap. He was so exceptionally smooth that one individual even handed him a substantial bribe to finalize the deal. Lustig pocketed the cash and vanished. But here's where it gets out of this world. Growing bored, he returned to Paris a month later and attempted the same scam on another set of dealers. The audacity of it is simply awe-inspiring. He wasn't merely peddling a significant landmark, he was offering a level of assurance that contemporary science has yet to achieve. 6. During the Second World War, the Polish army possessed an extraordinary asset, a bear named Wojtek that could drink beer, smoke cigarettes, and carry 100 pounds of explosives. Adopted as a cub by the soldiers, he quickly became one of the team, making his way onto a British transport vessel. They did not attempt to conceal him. Rather, they formally enlisted him. He became known as Private Wojtek, complete with his rank paybook and serial number. This bear was indeed a veteran of combat. During the fierce Battle of Monte Cassino, he willingly transported heavy crates of artillery shells, genuinely assisting his comrades in the fight. Just imagine being an enemy combatant glancing over a ridge to see a bear weighing 500 pounds hauling ammunition boxes. You would simply drop your weapon and rethink your life choices right there. 7. In 1696, the English government found itself in dire financial straits and devised a clever scheme. They introduced the window tax. Houses would be taxed based on the number of windows they featured. It was essentially a tax on looking outside. The public reacted by uniting in their refusal and began sealing up their windows. Whole blocks of cities transformed into dreary, oppressive structures, devoid of light or fresh air. This predictably turned homes into perfect breeding grounds for diseases like cholera and typhus. For 150 years, the government effectively made its own citizens ill and wretched, all in pursuit of garnering a few extra coins. It's a compelling reminder that any notion commencing with "let's tax sunlight" is likely a very poor idea. 8. The Olympic marathon held in St. Louis in 1904 was less an athletic undertaking and more a human science experiment that went terribly awry. It took place in oppressive heat around 90 degrees on roads that were little more than clouds of dust. The athlete who crossed the finish line first was disqualified because he had grown fatigued and received a ride in a vehicle for 11 miles. The true victor, Thomas Hicks, was experiencing hallucinations and had to be carried across the finish line after his trainers administered a mixture of brandy and actual rat poison to him. Another competitor was chased a whole mile off the course by wild dogs. A Cuban postman participating in the race decided to take a rest and snack on some rotten apples, which ultimately caused him food poisoning. It was an utter fiasco, a chaotic confluence of incompetence and suffering that leaves you pondering whether the prize was a gold medal or merely an act of survival. 9. Picture the scene. You are a British official in colonial India, grappling with a significant snake issue, a serious one. Cobras are everywhere. So you introduce a brilliantly simple plan, offering a cash reward for each dead cobra. For a week, you're hailed as a hero. People are presenting you with deceased snakes. You're distributing cash left and right. The issue seemed resolved. But soon you begin to notice that the snakes appearing are suspiciously fresh. That's because some local entrepreneurs had started to think creatively. They realized it was far easier to manufacture cobras than to locate them. They were essentially breeding deadly snakes right in their backyards. When the government finally caught wind of this cobra-centered pyramid scheme and put a stop to it, the snake breeders did what any sensible business person would do. They liquidated their assets. They unleashed tens of thousands of furious, unemployed cobras into the city. The situation escalated from bad to a biblical-scale plague overnight. 10. Back in the 1930s, long before individuals engaged in reckless acts for TikTok fame, they did absurd things just for the thrill of it. Enter the goldfish-swallowing phenomenon. It began when a Harvard student, likely named Chad, swallowed a live goldfish on a dare. The story circulated rapidly, and before long every college guy from coast to coast was downing live fish as if they were shots of tequila. This evolved into a legitimate competitive sport. Students proclaimed their official goldfish totals to local newspapers. One fellow at MIT, because naturally, it was MIT, even engineered a device with tubes and levers to gulp them down more efficiently. Can you imagine your grandfather recounting stories from his college years? We didn't have video games, we just consumed the pets. It was a time that was simpler yet remarkably foolish. 11. It is the year 1989. The U.S. Military has cornered Panamanian dictator Manuel Noriega in the Vatican embassy. A sensitive situation. Should they initiate a diplomatic row? Should they storm the premises? No. They brought forth the ultimate instrument of psychological warfare, a Dad's Rock playlist, for 10 uninterrupted days. No way. They unleashed the ultimate tool of psychological manipulation, a father's rock music playlist. For a solid 10 consecutive days, they blasted the embassy using massive speakers, broadcasting an unending loop of songs from Guns N' Roses, The Clash, and Van Halen at volumes capable of stripping paint from walls. This operation was dubbed Operation Nifty Package, and its explicit aim was to irritate a dictator into conceding. Surprisingly, it was successful. Noriega, a fervent opera enthusiast, could no longer endure. Welcome to the jungle and eventually capitulated. This marked a remarkable military triumph achieved through the astonishingly effective weapon of poor taste. 2-year. Kentucky, 1876. A woman is outside crafting soap when suddenly it starts to rain meat. Fresh meat. Pieces of it plummeting from a clear azure sky. This was not an unusual meteorological phenomenon. This was a meat shower. The entire town stood perplexed. In an act of legendary scientific courage, 2 individuals sampled it and reported it was either lamb or deer. The prevailing theory today suggests that a vast flock of vultures, also known as buzzards, had a hearty meal, soared over the farm, and then experienced simultaneous food poisoning. It resulted in a synchronized mid-air projectile vomiting spree. So the next time you fret over a bit of rain, just be grateful it isn't falling pre-digested deer pieces from a battalion of airborne trash disposals. After year. Most armies train by firing at targets. However, the Austrian army in 1788 chose to practice targeting each other. During a campaign against the Ottoman Empire, a group of Austrian soldiers, having indulged in schnapps, instigated a brawl. Amidst the darkness and confusion, a shot rang out. Then someone, likely the most intoxicated among them, shouted, "The Turks! The Turks!" The entire 100,000-man army stirred awake and collectively went into a frenzy. Cavalry charged towards infantry. Various regiments unleashed cannon fire at one another. For one chaotic night, the Austrian army engaged in a brutal full-scale fight against itself. When the genuine Ottoman army arrived 2 days later, they discovered 10,000 dead or injured Austrians and a thoroughly bewildered campsite. They essentially secured victory by arriving fashionably late, in year. The First Battle of Bull Run was intended to be the Super Bowl of the Civil War. The Union was set to decisively defeat the Confederates in one triumphant afternoon. It was perceived as such an easy win that the elite society of Washington, D.C. filled their carriages with champagne and picnic provisions and headed out to observe. They settled on a hill prepared to sip wine and enjoy the spectacle. However, the battle turned into a bloody, chaotic calamity, leading the Union Army to flee for their lives. The dilemma. The path back to D.C. was utterly congested with frantic picnickers scrambling to save their cucumber sandwiches. It resulted in an instantaneous traffic jam from hell. A chaotic blend of frightened soldiers and irate wine-fueled aristocrats. It was the moment that America realized war is in fact not a spectator sport. Year. When Tsar Peter the Great resolved to modernize Russia, he focused on the most crucial issue, facial hair. He gazed upon the long, splendid beards of his nobles and saw a representation of the past that he despised. Thus, he imposed the beard tax. Want to preserve that magnificent facial mane? You need to pay. He even handed out small metal tokens as receipts, much like coat checks for your chin. If one was discovered with an untaxed beard, the guards would restrain you and shave you right then and there, likely with a rusty farming implement. It was a state-sponsored campaign against resembling a wizard. Peter the Great not only constructed a new capital, but sought to forge a new nation, one clean-shaven face at a time. Year. In the 1,690 seconds, the nation of Scotland made a collective decision to undergo a midlife crisis. They aspired to become a trendy, affluent colonial empire akin to England. Therefore, they invested nearly every penny they possessed, nearly 1/4 of the entire country's liquid assets, in a single endeavor. A colony in Panama known as the Darien Scheme. Their ambition was to create a trading hub and attain immense wealth. The minor issue was that the site was a disease-ridden, alligator-infested, entirely inhospitable swamp. The failure of the colony was so immense it's nearly remarkable. Thousands perished. The vessels decayed, and all the funds vanished. Scotland was so thoroughly and completely bankrupted that it had no choice but to unite with England, forming Great Britain. They literally gambled the entire nation on one roll of the dice and lost everything. A year. It is 1910, and the world is on the brink of disaster. Hall's Comet is approaching, and scientists proclaim that its tail is laden with lethal poisonous gas. The newspapers, relishing a good panic, essentially print the headline: "A colossal space rock is on its way, ready to rain down doom upon us, and it seems we are all doomed." Naturally, this sends people into a frenzy. Yet, with every crisis arises a man in a low-cost suit with a so-called solution. Fraudsters emerged everywhere, marketing anti-comet tablets. What purpose did they serve? Absolutely none. They were simply sugar pills in disguise. However, individuals were so gripped by the fear of being obliterated by a cosmic blast that they purchased them by the loads. Some individuals even marketed anti-comet umbrellas, believing that a mere piece of fabric was enough to shield themselves from the void of space. It was a wonderfully absurd moment when humanity's deepest fear was counteracted solely by the placebo effect. 19. Allow me to introduce you to crinoline. In the 19th century, it represented the pinnacle of women's fashion. It was an enormous rigid structure, worn beneath skirts to create the illusion of resembling a human bell. Yet it was also perilous. These contraptions were so broad that women maneuvered around like a bus in a tight turn. They had no idea where their own rear ends were located. They could casually stroll past a fire, and their skirts would brush against the flames, instantly transforming them into human torches. Countless women were burned to ashes by their own clothing. They literally ignited in flames at social gatherings. But did this trend get halted? Absolutely not. They only made the skirts larger and even more flammable. It became a fashion declaration that boldly proclaimed, "I look fantastic, and I am prepared to accept the very real chance that I could ignite spontaneously at any given moment." Music. 20. History is riddled with wars waged for honorable reasons, and I am prepared to acknowledge the genuine likelihood that I could burst into flames at any instant. 20. Throughout history, numerous conflicts have been waged for honorable causes. This, however, is not one of them. In the year 1325, a group of soldiers from Modena, Italy sneaked into the rival city of Bologna and made off with a wooden bucket from a well. That's the story. It was the medieval version of swiping a traffic cone. Yet Bologna panicked. They demanded the bucket's return. Modena boldly replied, "Come and reclaim it." Thus, Bologna declared war a real war, filled with swords, horses, and countless lives lost in battle. All over a grumpy dispute about a stolen bucket. Modena emerged victorious, and to this day that same silly wooden bucket sits in a museum in Modena like it is the Holy Grail. It is the world's most priceless bucket, acquired through bloodshed, folly, and pure Italian fury. 21. The year is 193 AD. The Roman Emperor has just met his demise. His bodyguards, the elite Praetorian Guard, are deliberating on who will be the next emperor. Then one of them, likely named Vinny, proposes, "Why not just sell it?" And so they did just that. They put the entire Roman Empire up for auction. Two wealthy elderly men stood outside the military camp, shouting their bids as if they were at a cattle sale. "I will offer 20,000 sestertii to each soldier. I will give 25,000. The victor was a man named Didius Julianus. He purchased the empire, but his brief reign lasted only about 2 months before another general declared, "This is the most ridiculous thing I've ever encountered," and had him executed. This illustrates that even 2 millennia ago, capitalism had a knack for getting bizarre. 22. In the 18th century of London, if you found yourself bored, you had the option of visiting the theater, or you could saunter over to the local insane asylum for some inexpensive amusement. For merely a penny, you could gain entry to Bethlehem Royal Hospital, also known as Bedlam, and treat it like a petting zoo. A human petting zoo, that is. You could wander about, point at the patients, chuckle at their delusions, and even poke them with a stick if you felt adventurous. This was deemed a perfectly acceptable family outing. "Hey kids, finish your chores and we will go watch the crazies." It stood as one of London's hottest tourist attractions for centuries. It serves as a stark reminder that the so-called good old days often resembled a scene straight out of a Mad Max film. 23. In the late 1890s, the German pharmaceutical giant Bayer was riding high. They had just developed a remarkable new medication they touted as a non-addictive remedy for coughs, colds, and general irritability. They named it heroin because it made the patients feel heroic. And who was their intended audience for this groundbreaking creation? Children, of course. They were marketing pure, unadulterated heroin as a cough syrup for kids. Just take a moment to let that sink in. They composed one of the most destructive substances known to humanity and advised mothers to administer it to their toddlers. It's the kind of business move that's so shockingly wicked it circles back to being laughable. 24. During the summer of 1858, London emitted an odor reminiscent of a clogged porta-potty at a chili festival. For centuries, the city had been releasing all its untreated sewage directly into the river. Then a significant heatwave came along and transformed that contaminated water into a weapon of mass nasal devastation. The odor, referred to as the Great Stink, was so intense that it caused individuals to faint in the streets. Meanwhile, in the Houses of Parliament, they resorted to soaking the curtains in harsh chemicals just to survive meetings without succumbing to nausea. It was a stench so incredibly horrific that it compelled the government to finally construct a modern sewage system. It took a smell of epic proportions to motivate politicians into action. 24. While people are passionate about sports in the year 1969, El Salvador and Honduras escalated things beyond mere enthusiasm. Following a fiercely contested three-game World Cup qualifying soccer match between the two nations, which resulted in riots and long-standing animosity, these countries actually went to war. A genuine war, complete with tanks, aircraft, and thousands of casualties. This event is now referred to as the Football War. They literally started fighting due to the outcome of a soccer match. It's akin to providing an entire nation of angry sports enthusiasts with military forces. It definitely makes you reconsider that loud fan with the enormous foam finger, doesn't it? 25. Do you believe your dance moves are impressive? In 1518, in the city of Strasbourg, a woman named Friofa strolled into the streets and spontaneously began to dance. No music, no explanation, just frantic, relentless dancing. Within a week, 30 additional people had joined her, and in just a month there were hundreds. This wasn't a celebration, it was a plague. The dancing plague of 1518 amounted to a widespread epidemic where individuals genuinely could not cease dancing. This was not some joyful expression. It resembled a grotesque, agonizing fit set to a rhythm that only they could perceive. In their infinite wisdom, the authorities determined that the solution was more dancing. Hence, they constructed a stage and employed musicians. This was the medieval equivalent of suggesting someone suffering from food poisoning simply consume more spoiled seafood. Unsurprisingly, this exacerbated the situation. People danced until they collapsed from fatigue, suffered heart attacks, or had their feet wear out entirely. They ultimately danced themselves to death. It was the first and most lethal flash mob in history. A terrifying rave that no one wished to attend, presenting a 100% chance of death, and absolutely no after-party. 26. In the year 1835, a newspaper known as the New York Sun decided that presenting facts was uninteresting and that their readers were easily deceived. Therefore, they published a series of articles claiming that a renowned astronomer had constructed a super telescope and discovered life on the moon. And it wasn't merely microbial life. They alleged the existence of expansive forests, oceans, and herds of cosmic bison. However, the most intriguing part was the moon's residents named Vesperlio Homo, or man-bats, actual flying humanoids residing in temples, and the public was enthralled. The newspaper's circulation soared. Everyone across America was discussing the lunar inhabitants. Competing newspapers weren't outraged by the lie. They were frustrated that they hadn't thought of the story first. Scientific organizations convened serious discussions on how they might reach out to the bat-like beings. The entire tale was a total fabrication. Yet, for one blissful month, the whole country was united in its conviction that the moon was inhabited by a race of floating bear individuals. It was the original piece of fake news, and it stood as a work of art. 27. At the dawn of the 20th century, humanity stumbled upon a remarkable new element: radium. It emitted a glow in dim light. It was enigmatic, and naturally it had to be beneficial for you, right? It was the trendy potion of its era, albeit with heightened gamma radiation. Consequently, people began incorporating it into all manner of products. You could purchase radium-infused water that promised to alleviate all your health problems. There were radium chocolate bars offering extra vigor, radium toothpaste to deliver a dazzling smile, and my personal favorite, radium jockstraps, which purportedly enhanced virility. Indeed, men were willingly subjecting their family jewels to radiation in the name of boosting performance. Individuals were eagerly consuming radioactive substances for their wellness. One well-known socialite consumed such a substantial amount that upon his demise, his jaw had essentially disintegrated. It serves as a chilling reminder that just because something comes from nature and is all natural, doesn't mean it's safe to add to your coffee. It took several decades for people to comprehend that the magical glow of healthiness simply indicated their bodies were gradually being harmed from within. 28. If you believe that contemporary startup culture is brimming with exaggeration, allow me to introduce you to Gregor McGregor, the original fake-it-till-you-make-it kind of person, back in the 1820 seconds. This Scottish trickster made his way back to London, where he proclaimed himself the Kazakh, or prince of a stunningly resource-rich nation in Central America known as Poi. He didn't merely make this announcement, he launched a whole marketing campaign to support it. He produced books, crafted maps, and even formulated an absurdly detailed constitution. He painted a picture of a paradise featuring fertile lands, gold mines, and a sophisticated capital city just waiting for investors to come and explore. He sold land deeds, government bonds, and military commissions to hundreds of enthusiastic British citizens. Subsequently, 2 ships filled with colonists departed for their new homeland. They reached their destination only to discover exactly what had been there all along: an unlivable jungle swamp. There was no city, no gold, nothing at all. McGregor had entirely fabricated the nation. He deceived individuals into investing in real estate from his imagination, becoming the founder of the Fire Festival in the 19th century. In 1814, a brewery in London experienced an extraordinarily disastrous day. A gigantic vat containing over 135,000 gallons of fermenting beer exploded. This initiated a chain reaction, causing other vats to burst and unleashing a tidal wave of dark porter ale towering 15 feet high that crashed through the streets. The London beer flood was not a minor spill. It transformed into a complete booze tsunami. It shattered buildings, inundated basements, and tragically claimed the lives of 8 individuals. One of the victims was a child who was literally swept away by this river of beer. Just imagine the coroner's report: cause of death due to blunt force trauma, coupled with a blood alcohol level of 0.08 solely from absorption. The brewery found itself in court, but the judge ruled it was ultimately an act of God, implying that God either had a deep-seated dislike for cheap beer or aimed to orchestrate a party in the most rock and roll manner possible. It remains an unparalleled natural disaster in history that likely got a multitude of people drunk on its path to destruction. In 1784, the British government, in its relentless endeavor to impose taxes on every possible item, introduced the brick tax. The tax was based on the number of bricks utilized. It was intended to be a clever means of taxing construction, but they greatly underestimated the sheer magnificent spitefulness of the British populace. Builders promptly began crafting their bricks larger and larger. They employed massive, hefty bricks, comparable to cinder blocks in size, to minimize the count and evade the tax collector. This was no subtle form of protest. It was an architectural combat. The government retaliated by instituting a legal limit on brick size, akin to a referee in a boxing match. It devolved into a full-fledged arms race between bureaucratic greed and architectural cunning. It's a compelling tale, illustrating that nothing fuels human creativity quite like the fervent desire to dodge paying taxes. Do you think your office politics are challenging? In the late 14th century, the Catholic Church found itself embroiled in a minor spat that resulted in the existence of 2 popes, one in Rome and one in France. Both laid claim to being the one true pope, subsequently excommunicating each other and essentially labeling the other as a counterfeit pope destined for hell. Then, in a bid to rectify the situation, a council ended up electing a 3rd pope. However, the first 2 stubbornly refused to resign. Suddenly, there were 3 popes. 3 individuals all donning the grand hat, all asserting they had the exclusive connection to God, and all engaging in the furious composition of papal bulls, asserting that the other 2 were possessed by demons. The Pope versus Pope saga was the world's most divine and perplexing reality TV series. It endured for almost 40 years, inflicting far more harm on the church's reputation than nearly any other event in history, probably leaving the divine wondering who was truly in command. In the year 897, Pope Stephen VI had a disagreement with one of his predecessors, Pope Formosus. The twist in this story was that Formosus was already deceased and resting in his grave. This did not deter Stephen. He commanded that Formosus's corpse, which had been deceased for 9 months, be exhumed dressed in full papal garb and propped on a throne for a trial. This bizarre event was known as the Cadaver Synod. Stephen hurled accusations at the decaying body, which had a lawyer appointed to defend it, quite possibly experiencing the most peculiar and easiest day of his professional life. Unsurprisingly, the deceased pope lost the case. He was declared guilty. His 3 fingers used for blessings were severed, and his remains were disposed of in the river. This wasn't merely a grudge being held. This was akin to taking your resentment out for an upscale meal, only to plunge a fork into it. The level of spiteful revenge was so excessive that it transcended the realm of humanity. It's a form of art. 33. Long before becoming the reigning champion of condiments, ketchup was marketed as a medicinal remedy. Back in the 1830s, an Ohio doctor known as Dr. John Cook Bennett asserted that tomatoes could remedy everything from diarrhea to digestive issues. He concocted a recipe for tomato ketchup and turned it into a pill. These ketchup pills sparked a nationwide craze. Other firms quickly followed suit, concocting their own versions of snake oil that claimed to cure scurvy and heal fractures. For a fleeting, radiant moment in American history, individuals believed the solution to all their ailments was a concentrated dollop of tomato paste. And in a certain sense, they were not entirely mistaken. While it may not eradicate illness, it can undoubtedly revive a dull and dreary hamburger. And at times, that's the sole miracle one truly requires. It was a pivotal moment for America, realizing that occasionally the finest remedy is simply making your meals more exciting. Therefore, I believe we can all concur that humanity did not prevail through intellect alone. Rather, it was sheer bewildering. Foolish luck. And now here's my challenge to you. Share one historical occurrence in the comments that disproves my claim. Go on, I'm all ears. In the meantime, like the button, spread the madness to someone who still thinks history was reasonable, and don't forget to subscribe with the notification bell activated so you never miss the next proof that the past was nothing short of an outrageous spectacle. Thank you for tuning in, and I'll catch you in the next episode.